Welcome to Roman on CVI. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about something that people ask me about all the time, and I never really have a prepared answer for this, so I have a little prompt sheet that I've prepared to try to answer this question better. And the question is, what should I have in my CVI Range Assessment Kit? It's a valid question. It's just one that I don't think about very often. I do sometimes take materials with me to do evaluations. More often I'm at Pediatric View and I have my own space with cabinets and things are behind closed doors for most cases. That's important, of course. But let me think. If I had to answer that question, what would be critical to have? Well, part of the reason I struggle with this is because I think every CVI range evaluation, it needs to be customized. It's really helpful if parents or educators provide you with materials, that are familiar to the child or meaningful to the child. I could go through a repertoire of 200 objects and maybe not hit on the fact that this child really seems interested in Clifford. I wouldn't know. I didn't have a clue what Caillou was. Had no idea, but very meaningful to a particular child. So it's really important to first figure out where that child lives, like what matters to them. That information often comes out in the parent interview. And so by the time I finish the parent interview, I have a pretty good idea what materials to go to. I also am really happy if a parent brings video examples of something I wouldn't be able to see in my space, or if they bring, objects that are really important to the child. So all of that aside, the question still remains, what would I put in my CVI Range Kit? So I'm going to go through a few things that I think are kind of standard. First, lights. Obviously, we need to have a really good flashlight that is intense but safe and is color light. That's really important. If color draws and holds a child's visual attention, then why wouldn't we use that as a support in order to elicit attention? Okay, so lights. I have a light that's very intense but safe, and I use that one consistently when I'm evaluating, doing modified confrontation fields. I also use that light as I pass it across the child's line of sight to see if they close their eyes defensively to that bright light. If they do, well, that's a typical response. If they don't, then that kind of suggests to me that the child's need for light is much greater. So lights. The second one, these are in no particular order, no particular phase. I can't imagine not having some fabrics or backgrounds that have various levels of complexity, from very simple black backgrounds to more and more dense fabric or background. Sometimes people select things for complexity of array testing. Great to do, but they select things that have very sparse pattern. And what we want to do is go from black to two color, but then a sparsely arranged background, and then the background becomes more and more crowded. That's how we're going to get those layers in 3-dimension. The CVI complexity sequence cards are something that, if I'm traveling to do assessments, I always tuck a couple sets of those in my bag as well. That helps us test complexity of array in 2-dimension. Okay, if you want to make your own complexity sequence cards using photographic images and increasing amounts of background complexity, kudos, it's a good idea. I also would always have clearly a black background with me, some kind of black background, an invisiboard or something. I would wear something like this. How many of you have ever seen me not in black? Another item I would take with me always would be an iPad. We know that individuals with CVI are drawn not only to color, but to movement and to light. And so the backlighting of an iPad helps me select certain kinds of lessons or activities or images that will have the element of backlighting, or perhaps the element also of movement, and certainly vibrant color. So that's also important to have. If the child has their own iPad, I think it's interesting to see what they like to look at and then show them something novel. So there's a number of apps I would use. I'm not going to talk about those today, but an iPad. I would also have small items that I can put against those complex backgrounds. And those small items, the error I see all the time is that the items are too big. So think of a Cheerio size object. Now, in fact, I use cereal or goldfish crackers or some small object. If the child isn't allowed to have those foods or it's dangerous, I might use little balls and always, get them before the child might bring them to their mouth. But it's important that they be small, because if they're too big, that the surface of that object might be unique among the pattern, and therefore the child might have a greater opportunity to see it, even though complexity remains difficult. So think about Cheerio size objects. I also would have, as I mentioned before, some novel objects that I think the child has never seen before, to pair with the way they attend to the things they already know and really care about. I don't think it's a test of novelty to just simply put an object in front of a child and see if they look at it and then check it off and say, oh, they looked at it, so novelty is resolved. Novelty has depth and breadth. It is a huge one. It is the characteristic upon which salient features were built, that instruction in salient features. It is the one that relates to the visual curiosity in environments. So that's a big one. I would also have books. I often take books, and I like to take books that have very simple backgrounds. So, a star against a black background kind of a thing, a little more complexity, and then one that's highly complex and novel and of different kinds of images, so that I can see what kind of images captivate this child, what level of complexity allows them to find the ball in the picture if it's really busy. But I have to urge you, this is the problem with bringing your own books or having your own books, is that many children with CVI are attached to particular books. I also don't want children with CVI to be exposed to baby books if they're not a baby. So be cautious about what you select. I bring a mirror because I want to see if the child is able to attend to their own face. That's paired with other things like how do they attend to familiar people, novel people, other tests that I do that have to do with facial attention, discriminating faces. But a mirror is something I can quickly show the child and see whether they're just looking at the shininess in the mirror, really engaged with their own face, or mostly looking at the person behind them, or kind of nothing at all. And you can bring shiny or mylar things for those individuals who are in phase 1. I'd like to say what you shouldn't bring also. I'm not a fan of multicolor noisy lights, like those ones that you turn them on, they're battery operated, and they spin around and they make a whirling noise and they have lots of different colors on them. At that point, you are testing multisensory images. The object is multicolor, it's multisensory because it makes sound. It is extremely complex, and it's not what I recommend, not for testing. But I don't recommend the use of white lights because, again, a child might not attend to a white light being presented, but if you change the color, they might look right away. White light is really kind of more for ocular assessment than for CVI assessment. I wouldn't recommend that you just bring a set of random objects for the child to look at in order to determine whether they will respond to novelty. I mentioned that before. And I'm going to present I also wanted to say, don't bring Elmo books or baby books just because they're simple. If you can't find something simple for older students, older individuals, I would recommend that you make them. And finally, here's the challenge. The challenge is this. I've tried to have what I call a year without a pom-pom because I feel as though so many people view work with CVI as kind of, put something on a light box and give them a pom-pom. And of course, we know it's so much more than that. And so I'm trying to really challenge myself to look at other things that have movement, reflection, vibrant color, but are not a pom-pom. I fear that the pom-pom becomes too permanent a member of that child's sort of CVI materials. And so I like to model that we can find other reflective, shiny things. We can put mylar, make a little sleeve to put around the child's bottle, cup, mug, whatever they like to use. That's also shiny. So it's important to think about that. Some people love to have a slinky with them to test kids in phase 1. Well, that's also good. Just make sure it's light translucent so that if you pair it with a light, it looks like it kind of lights up. So what I'm saying is the bottom line is that it's a tricky question, what to put in the CVI assessment kit. I would be very leery of kind of a preset group of things that could test all children. I don't think that exists. In my office, I gather lots of things that I think could be used for a particular child, a particular type of child. I think about what I'm trying to test and then have 4 or 5 different kinds of choices to use to test that same thing. Because really, it's just so true that children with CVI require us to kind of get into their point of view. And if they're not interested in a Cheerio, I hope I have 3 or 4 other options that I can use so that I don't say, oh, the child can't be tested, but rather say, let's try another option. It's a big challenge. It's a fun challenge. You get to buy cool stuff. So enjoy, and I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.